We're gonna take a turn, and we're actually gonna focus on some non-playoff teams because there's some pretty interesting conversation coming out of Winnipeg, and particularly out of Mark Scheifele's mouth when he talked about at the end, at the like literally 15 minutes after the last game of their season, he comes out and says, "Oh, I gotta see what the team's doing. I gotta talk to Cheveldaev and see what direction the team's heading in. I'm in the prime of my career. I feel so good." Mark Scheifele. What did you think about those comments, first of all? And is it maybe the time for him to leave that franchise?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Mark Scheifele's comments, but I want to give the Paul Stastny comments as well.
Oh, we can't forget about those.
Before we get into analysis, Paul Stastny after the game, he didn't name a certain player, but we all know who that was directed to. First line center Mark Scheifele. Paul Stastny said, "We've got to be held more accountable, whether it's player on player. We've got to have more respect for each other. When you don't have that, when you don't care about the teammate next to you potentially, and you just care about what you're doing and individual things, that starts bleeding into the game. You also have to have self-awareness and realize that sometimes you have to sacrifice a little for the greater team." I wonder who that was directed to.
Yeah, those are not light comments either from a guy who's been around the league on a couple of good teams.
Yeah,
that's coming from frustration built up over a pretty crappy year.
Yeah, and I don't have the verbatim quote, but I remember he said after candidly that nobody likes to be embarrassed in the dressing room and that everybody has been embarrassed at some point, but everybody needs to hear it at some point from a coach that you need to get your head out of your butt and start caring more about the name on the front and not the one on the back. And David Lowry, is it David Lowry?
Dave Lowry
apparently hasn't done a great job there. The room is pretty dysfunctional, so I'm not very surprised that the big names are coming out.
Well, maybe Dave Lowry's not the best coach, but these rumors have been bubbling under the surface about there being some locker room issues, some culture issues in Winnipeg. And who's been there the whole time? It's been Mark Scheifele, it's been Blake Wheeler. And in my opinion, to come out after the last game of the season, after a disappointing season, if you're talking about me, I got to see what's best for Mark Scheifele. Mark Scheifele's a really good player. The way he was framing his and this sort of perspective, I was actually listening to the Steve Dangle podcast, and this is what they said, and it kind of changed the way I looked at the situation. You had a really disappointing season where you probably should have made the playoffs, and you're saying, I feel really good. I'm in my prime. You're deflecting blame away from you when you're the guy on that team.
Yep.
That, to me, that rubbed me the wrong way. And I think it's okay to think that guys are competitive. They want to do better. And it's okay to have that conversation with Cheveldaev about, hey, I'm feeling good. What's going on with the team? But to say that in public after and basically sewer your whole team in front of the media, to me, that, I don't know. I'm not really a big fan of what Mark Scheifele did.
Yeah, it has to be behind closed doors. But we're going to talk a little bit about now what's going to transpire with this Mark Scheifele incident. Yeah. Let's break it down for anybody listening, how good Mark Scheifele has been over his recent past. I'll give some numbers here. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, Mark Scheifele is on arguably the most team-friendly deal in the NHL at $6.125 million a year, cap hit till 2023, 2024, right? Say what you want. Mark Scheifele is probably maybe a top 10 center in the league, definitely a top 20 center in the league. Offensively. People don't like to hear it because, quite frankly, he's a bit of a baby. He's dirty at times. We saw what he did to Jake Evans last year.
Yeah.
But let's look at his numbers over the past 6 years. He's been at a point per game in every season he's played over the last 6 years. 140 goals, 210 assists, 350 points in 336 games, right? In the last season, in the last 5 seasons, he's 21st in total points, right? And that's with him missing around 40-ish games. Like, everyone said he had a bad year this year, right? He put up 29 goals and 70 points in 67 games, right? The point I'm trying to make is that Mark Scheifele is unbelievable.
He's good, sure.
Right?
He's good.
The only detriment, I use that word a little bit candidly because it's a big component of a center's game, is that he's probably, next to Leon Draisaitl, the worst defensive center in the league.
He's so bad. Can I rip up some stats here for you?
Go.
Okay. So among forwards this year that played at least 1,000 minutes, so if you're playing 1,000 minutes, you're one of the better players in the league. He has the 18th worst Corsi against per 60, and get this, the 3rd worst expected goals against per 60.
That's bad.
Out of all of those forwards, and the worst high danger chances against per 60. So defensively, it seems like when you talked about Leon Draisaitl, sometimes looks like he takes his skates off in the D zone. Mark Scheifele does the same thing. You're complaining about the team not doing well and you feeling so good. Well, do you think that maybe on one side of the puck you're contributing to some of their downfall? And granted, could some of that be systems? Sure, it can be, because his whole line is low on this list. But I think at a point when you've rotated through a couple of coaches, and mind you, Paul Maurice is typically a very defensive-minded coach, and you did not succeed defensively under him, I think that falls to the player. So yeah, he's fantastic offensively, and maybe the offensive side warrants that $6 million contract, but if you're one of the worst defensive players in the league, I don't think you have the clout to be saying what you're saying and to be calling shots like that, in my opinion. And clearly you can tell I'm not a huge fan of Mark Scheifele. But
yeah, you're completely correct. But I think the reason why he thinks he's the guy is because when you put up 80, 85 points a year, you start to think you don't need to play defense.
Fair,
right?
Fair.
It's not fair, because that's not how hockey is played.
Yeah,
right?
But you can see where that thought process comes from.
And then surprise, surprise, that guys like Mark Scheifele don't like it when advanced stats are kept on their defensive capabilities.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, if Mark Scheifele was named Marcus Soderstrom, he'd be getting lambasted. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's Canadian. He gets a lot of, less scrutiny from some of the media, but I don't know. I think he needs to take a look in the mirror and be accountable. I think that whole team needs to be a little bit accountable, because they're too good to be where they are. Yeah,
okay, you couldn't have led me into a better segue about where he will go. Theoretically, I think he shouldn't move. The Jets are a playoff team on paper. They have arguably the best top six in the NHL. They got Wheeler, Scheifele, Dubois, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers. They had Andrew Kopp, but they shipped him out. I don't think I would take any other top six in the league.
They're stacked.
Right?
They're stacked.
Let's keep going. They have a top 5 goalie in the league. Connor Hellebuck, in a good year, is maybe top 3. Defensively, they're below average. But if they improved on their defense this offseason, that team should probably win that division, right? Or they should be fighting for it.
They should be fighting for a playoff spot. I think on paper, they're better than the two teams in their division that finished ahead of them in Nashville and Dallas. Yeah. I think they can be better than both of them. Maybe a new coach coming in this offseason can change things. I don't know who they're going to hire, but you'd hope maybe after a hard offseason, Mark Scheifele can figure it out. It's not even only Mark Scheifele. Blake Wheeler's terrible defensively, so is Kyle Connor. Kyle Connor also scored 45 goals this year, so take that with a grain of salt, his poor defense. But there's something. This team has something. They need to figure it out before they really regret the missed opportunity here.
Yeah, so to your point about maybe a new coach changing things, they did not grant Dave Lowry an extension on his contract, but they did grant him an interview. And I wonder how much that has to do with his son's total time on ice going up by like 30% since he had been hired.
Kidding. I think you have to I don't know if Adam Lowry's a big enough component on the team to fear offending him, but I do feel like you can't just fire his dad. Maybe you have to give him an interview and then say he lost it on merit. But
true.
Yeah.
So if they decide on moving him, let's talk about this a little bit. Mark Scheifele has a 10-team no trade list. We don't know who is on that list, but if they make another Evgeny Dadonov mistake, we might find out a guy. In my opinion, we're looking for teams here that are looking for a first-line center, obviously, are contenders or a center away from it, and have picks and cap space that are ready to move. But granted, maybe that's not even that important because he's so team-friendly with his deal.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think that leaves us with number 1, the New York Rangers, right? Their second-line center is Ryan Strome. I'm sorry, you can't have Artemi Panarin playing with Ryan Strome.
Yeah.
I think that is a great thing that the second line would be Panarin, Strome, Kopp, and now their top 6 is unbelievable. Even if you get 3/4 of the production from Kreider next year that you did from this year. In my opinion, second, I got the Minnesota Wild on this list for the same reason. Fiala, Boldy, right? But who's down the second line center?
Gaudreau right now?
Gaudreau, exactly. The reason why I don't see him going there is because you mentioned pretty well a couple episodes ago that those recapture penalties are going to kill that team.
They're going to be in trouble.
Right? And you know who the last team I have?
Who's that?
If the Edmonton Oilers lose this year, I think that organization brings Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid into the room, and they go, we need a win. We need a win now. Draisaitl, if you're comfortable playing the wing, maybe you go out and get Mark Scheifele.
That's doubling down on offense galore and substandard defense. But you can, if you're that top six will be so crazy. You probably won't lose many games.
Yeah, and if you put Mikko Koskinen on the other way, I mean, you actually you only lost about $1 million in cap space. You could go out and get a good defenseman.
Yeah, they'll need to sweeten that deal a bit. But if you're Edmonton, this is a little bit of a sidetrack now. But if you're Edmonton, you have guaranteed maybe 3 to 4 more years of those two guys because of their contracts. You need to figure it out. You need to win, or at least portray yourselves as legit contenders by the time those contracts are starting to run out, so you actually get commitment from them back.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
You have to portray it. And I'm sorry, Edmonton has not done a good enough job showing that core that they're in it to win it.
Yeah.
Who'd they go out and get last year? Cody Ceci and Duncan Keith? Like, come on.
And they re-signed Barry.
Right? They re-signed Barry. I feel like Connor McDavid went into that room and made them go get Evander Kane because they just hadn't done anything.
Yeah, I mean, besides what you think of the dude, that's been a good hockey move for them.
Yep. Okay. Who do you have? So who do you have Mark Scheifele going to if you could name a team?
I think that, and I don't know if they have the cap space for this. I actually don't think that they do, but just in theory, I think he fits well on a team like the New York Islanders, because that team prides itself on playing hard defense and really, really solid structure. So if you get Scheifele into a system like that, he probably won't like it because he is a bit of a baby. But if you can put him into a system that will at least sort of mask some of his defensive liabilities and he can give them the scoring that they need, I think. And if you have a couple centers of Barzal and Mark Scheifele, I think that puts that team over the top, and they're going to be better next year anyway because they started the first 20 games on the road or something crazy like that. I think if they have the cap space and they're not on his no trade list, that might be a decent option.
Yeah.
So speaking of teams in the West, in the Central Division that underperformed, we're not going to talk about the Blackhawks off the ice because we could talk about that for 5 hours. What we're going to talk about them is on the ice and sort of the moves that they might have to make or some difficult decisions that they might have to make. And who I'm hinting at here are legends, Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. This team has, and it's important actually, let me take a step back to preface this conversation by saying that they have no move clauses. So whatever happens here is fully in their control. But in saying that, they're going to have a tough conversations to be had about their futures here. What are you kind of thinking right now?
Let's start off with Jonathan Toews. This is really sad. I mean,
yeah,
as a player, we're only looking at him on the ice, like you said. A few years ago, he was in the upper percentiles of both offense and defense. He could have made a case for being the best two-way center in the league at one point. Last year, he was good too. He had 60 points in 70 games. Legitimately, every year before that, he had been locked to put up 60 a year. Yeah. I mean, this year it had all gone to crap. Yeah. I mean, he has 37 points in 71 games. You know, there's a lot of things that contributed to that. We won't delve into it. But, you know, I wonder how much that has to do with the team being awful. Like, he's also 34 on a $10.5 million cap hit, making him maybe the most overpaid player in the league.
Ooh, he's up there. He's up there.
Right? I mean, wherever this guy goes, Chicago's going to have to eat at least half of the contract.
Well, so you're in the camp of they trade them. So they only have 1 year left on their contract.
Yes.
So you're in the camp of, at least for Jonathan Toews, try and get him out this offseason.
Oh, that's what you're asking me. Yeah, 100%. These two guys are walking. 100%. 100%.
So they're not, you don't think they're re-signing, so you might as well trade them now?
No, this organization is in a lot of problems right now, both on and off the ice. I don't think these guys want anything to do with this organization. I think they've been bad for a really long time. I think they find fresh starts. I don't know why. You think one of them wants to resign?
Not necessarily that I think one of them wants to sign, but I do think that they at least wouldn't want to be kicked out. I don't know. They're modern day legends at this hockey club. I do think they need to leave.
Yeah.
Because you need to get some value for them, because this team's hinted at a rebuild, right? These two guys are not going to help you tomorrow. They're not going to help you 5 years from now because they're going to be retired. And especially Patrick Kane's got a lot of value. I know we haven't gotten to him yet, but he can actually get a lot of value.
Yeah. I mean, you said it best. Like you convinced me with the Jacob Chikrin argument. You better get something for these players before they walk and you get nothing, right?
Exactly.
So when we're talking about Jonathan Toews, I mean, I think he goes to a team that needs center depth, obviously, that needs cup-winning experience. Once again, the New York Rangers are a great fit just because down the middle, they're very empty. Honestly, I mean, Pittsburgh too, right?
Crosby Toews?
Yeah, Jonathan Toews is a rental player. Pittsburgh has a year left with this core at most. I mean, the second line center is Malkin right now. He's getting old. We see so many times, like we saw with Claude Giroux, that those types of players go to the wing. So if you can convince Malkin to play on the wing and then they go Taves Malkin, who knows? Maybe they try to like get any last juice that's left from this core and try to make a run.
That's interesting for anybody that was a fan of watch Team Canada like 2014, 2010 with those two with Sid and Taves up the middle. That'd be kind of funny to go back and.
That's what I mean. They have chemistry, right?
Go back and watch that, yeah. And what about now? We talked about they're gonna have to retain on that deal for sure.
At least half, yeah, at most half.
They're gonna have to retain half, and have 5.75 million. If you can put up, let's say 45 points, if he has a better year, I think you can get value for almost 6 million.
I think he will. He didn't play with great line mates. I think they played Kane and DeBrincat together.
Yeah,
there's
so
nobody
he was
left
there with like Kubalik or something like
right?
that.
Or I think on a good team, he's putting up 50, and I mean nobody in their right mind is giving 10.5 million for Jonathan Taves, right? But at 5.25, I mean that's not a bad deal.
No,
especially that it's just a year.
Yeah, it's 1 year, and then if you like him, I feel like if he's in a situation where he thinks he can win, he's made so much money, he can probably take a small contract to stay at the end of his career. I think if you get him in this offseason and he likes where you're going, he might be willing to stick around for a cheap cap hit.
I agree. Do you have a team that you think Taves should go to, or should we move on to Patrick Kane?
I don't have a team. Honestly, I don't. So let's move over to Patrick Kane.
Sure.
Patrick Kane is not Johnny Taves.
Not even close.
He is still a very, very good player, and you probably get a nice return for him on the trade market.
Mm-hmm.
And if you retain on top of that, you're getting a crazy deal.
100%. Patrick Kane put up 92 points this year in 78 games.
That's
with
crazy,
26 goals after a very bad start.
Wow.
Right? Do you not think that from a purely offensive perspective, he's still a top 10 winger in the league? Like, he has to be.
He's got to be up there.
Right? So like you said, there will be a lot of value. Teams may only need to, Chicago may only need to retain 25%, right? Because $7.5 million cap hit for 1 year for a purely rental guy that can get you 90 points is pretty good.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yeah.
Buffalo did it with Taylor Hall.
Yeah, true.
Right? So when we're looking for it, the market for Patrick Kane will be way bigger. Once again, we're looking for teams with center depth because now these teams obviously don't need a center. They're looking for a winger. And we're looking for a team that is on the verge of contention. You have an idea of who I'm going with here?
I don't, but I want to know.
Let me tell you.
Okay, go.
Why? What are you thinking?
I don't know why Boston came to mind.
No,
Okay.
not Boston. Let me tell you. Go all the way west, Vancouver. I think he fits perfectly in Vancouver.
Wow.
Right? That team is solid. Solid goalie. I like their defense. I've alluded to it. On paper, they're much better than you would think. That team is buying into the Boudreau system. If he was there all year, they would have made the playoffs, right? The scoring depth isn't great. Down the middle, they have Miller and Pettersson. Those are their two best players. Their wingers aren't great.
True.
You put a guy like Patrick Kane beside JT Miller, man, this top six is poised to make the playoffs.
That's true. That's actually a really, really good spot for him.
Right? The second team that I have is the same idea in St. Louis. This team is pushing.
Another 20-goal scorer.
That's what I mean. They had 9, make it 10. Like, what people don't understand here is that, like, Patrick Kane, it's only going to be for a year. These teams don't care about the cap hit if it's just 1 year, right? Yeah. Their centers are gorgeous with Ryan O'Reilly, Robert Thomas, and Shen, right? Yeah. On the wingers, it's Buchnevich, Tarasenko, Perron, Kyrou.
No huge names, but they're good. But this takes them to another level.
100%. They don't have a clinical finisher on that team. This team is clearly built for the playoffs. I think if you put Patrick Kane on St. Louis, man, that team, I think, wins the cup.
True.